Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our webinar commemorating the 80th anniversary of the Babyn Yar massacre and discussing more widely representations of Ukrainian and Jewish shared past in literature. My name is Olesa Khrersonsky, and I'm the director of the Ukrainian Institute London, a center for Ukraine-related educational and cultural activities. Just a quick warning that this webinar will be held in Ukrainian with simultaneous translation interpretation into English.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. Thank you very much for joining us on our webinar, 80 years of Babyn Yar, Ukrainian-Jewish shared past in literature. I'm Olesa Khrersonsky. I'm director of Ukrainian Institute London, which is a cultural and educational center related to Ukraine. We raise issues pertaining not only to Ukraine, but to the entire world. We are a charity, so we always encourage you to make donations. We appreciate all of them. They enable us to hold some events free of charge. We are very glad that our co-organizers of our host today are Ukrainian-Jewish Encounter. That's an organization with which we have been cooperating for quite a while, and they support us in a number of joint projects. And I will give the floor now to Natalia Fedushak, who joined Ukrainian-Jewish Encounter in October 2013 with more than 20 years of international journalism experience. She has spent much of her career covering the former Soviet Union, from the empire's breakup to the challenges faced by the newly independent states. She has written for leading publications in Europe and North America, including the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the Denver Post, and the Kiev Post. Natalia was a full scholar as well as an international health journalism fellow with the Henry Koisner Family Foundation in Ukraine, fellow with the American Political Science Association in Washington, D.C. Natalia holds a bachelor's degree from George Washington University and a Master of International Affairs from Columbia University. Natalia, thank you very much for your support and for participation, and the floor is yours. Ukrainian-Jewish Encounter is a Canadian NGO set up in 1978 to deepen the understanding of the variety, diversity, and complexity of Ukrainian-Jewish relationships over years, with a focus on their future development. And it's my great pleasure and honor to be part of this webinar from Kiev today.
Babyn Yar має особливо
Ukrainian and Jewish people who have always lived in this land. Literature is an important way of trying to understand each other better. And the discussion that we are going to have today will enable us to understand this tragedy better, its root causes, and I hope that we will be able to hear one another, to find common ground. Our organization marked 75 years of the Babyn Yar tragedy. We had a very interesting program, and I encourage you to visit our website to see what this program was like. And I'm looking forward to today's discussion as well. Thank you, Natalia, very much. You can see it is my great pleasure to introduce Anton Drobovych, our moderator today. He's the head of the Ukrainian Institute of National Memory, responsible for formulating public policies on remembrance, developing commemorative practices, and leading research. He's had a career spanning academia, journalism, policymaking, and museum development in Ukraine. He was an advisor to the Minister of Education in Ukraine and also chaired the Department of Museum Planning at Mistetsky Arsenal, one of Ukraine's leading museums and curating to his appointment as the head of Ukrainian Institute of National Memory, Anton Drobovych curated educational programs at the Babyn Yar Holocaust Memorial Center. He is an ideal moderator for today's discussion. Anton, over to you. Good afternoon. Thank you, Alessa, for the introduction. Thank you, Natalia, for your introductory remarks. And I would like to thank Ukrainian Institute London for hosting this event, which is extremely important in the context of yesterday's and today's events related to the commemoration of this tragedy. And it is a good opportunity for us to remember the people and to commemorate the people who perished then. Today we are going to speak not about the history or historiography in terms of chronology of the events, but rather on the reflection of that history in the literary narrative. And I would first like to introduce our speakers. They are both poets and writers. It's Marianna Kiyanovska. She is a poet, writer, translator, and literary scholar. She is a member of PEN Ukraine, and her works have been translated into English, Belarusian, Polish, Serbian, and Russian. She is also a winner of the Shevchenko National Prize for her collection of poetry, Babyn Yar in Voices, and we will hear a couple of poems from that collection today. She is a recipient of prestigious awards, including Joseph Korzeniowski Literary Prize and the Kiev Laurels Literary Festival Prize. Welcome, Marianna Kiyanovska. We also have with us a writer, the author of 20 poems and essays in Russian and more recently in Ukrainian. It's Boris Khrersonsky. His works have also been translated into various languages, including English, German, French, Italian, Dutch, etc. And he received the Yuri Shevelyuk Prize for his book An Open Diary in 2015 and the Voloshin Kiriyenko Award for a significant contribution to the development of Ukrainian literature. So the list of awards is fairly long, but the enjoyment of their works is even greater. And I encourage all of you after this webinar, if you haven't read their poems, their essays and novels, to do so. Boris, welcome as well. Since I'm a historian, I have to introduce you into a historic context of Babyn Yar. On September 29 and 30 in 1940, the Nazi troop who had occupied Kiev, the Ukrainian capital, a couple of days before, started a gross action. They summoned the Jews of the city to a checkpoint, and on the 29th and 30th of September, they were corralled to this Babyn Yar ravine and killed there. And later, they took a record of all those events and the chronology of all those events very thoroughly and meticulously. And according to historians, more than 100,000 people were killed in Babyn Yar, mostly Jews, Romans, Sinti, communists, Soviet prisoners of war, Ukrainian nationalists, etc. So people who violated curfew, for example, were also killed and buried there in Babyn Yar. So the memory of Babyn Yar is also the memory of Holocaust. And Patrick Dubois, well-known researcher of the Holocaust, underscored this inhumane way to introduce the industry of death into the history of humankind. So yesterday we had a mass with representatives of different confessions. We were talking to the descendants of those killed in Babyn Yar, who were traumatized, and this trauma has to be voiced, has to be articulated, including in literature. Hence our topic and some of the first questions to our wonderful guests. It is both a question of or about history and about literature. Many people wrote about this tragedy in mid-40s, in 1943, 46, and later in 1960s. Yeah. There is one artist, Russian artist, who I spoke to in Ukraine, and he said, okay, a lot has been written about the Babyn Yar. So I think there's enough, but almost nobody knows that the first text about this tragedy appeared in Yiddish, and he also quoted Ilya Ehrenburg, Vasily Granovsky, and Vasil Shvets, later Mykola Bajan, Stus, etc., but very few people, including experts, know about it. And I will read out loud a poem of 1946. He was a poet, and he was the veteran of World War II. Our children are rising from beneath the earth. They are underloved, undereducated, and this is a fragment from the poem of 1944. So, can you tell us for seeming forgetfulness about that? Yeah, this topic is very close to me. The memory of Holocaust of Babyn Yar was suppressed over the entire Soviet history. Since from 1947, the so-called anti-Semitic campaign was launched, leading to the extermination of the entire literature and poets and writers. So you will know that a lot of poets were arrested, shot, killed, and the memory of Babyn Yar was tagged as Zionist propaganda during the Stalin era and later under Khrushchev's reign. So the Jews' rights were not violated openly, but covertly. And I happened to see some of the KGB documents which stated that people are trying to commemorate the Babyn Yar tragedy, and we have to stop this anti-Soviet provocation. So even before Yevtushenko's poem, there were several attempts to do so in literature, but you will remember how that poem by Yevtushenko starts. There are no monuments over Babyn Yar. And that was an admission by the most popular Soviet poet that people tried to hush this tragedy. And Shostakovich also included that poem into his Symphony Number 13. Ilya Ehrenburg wrote about Babyn Yar back in 1940, but that was never promoted, that was never advanced as part of the large Soviet literature. If I may add, we should understand the way the Soviet literature treated any type of trauma. It's not only about the Babyn Yar tragedy and poetry related to it, be it in Russian or in Yiddish. But the wartime poets, those poets who participated in World War II, who dared to write about it, would never see their poems published or in print anywhere. So, and they had children and grandchildren who would be preserving their works for the generations to come. I would also add the mentioning of the phenomenon of Yevtushenko. Of course, he was the great poet, and he promoted this topic even when it wasn't popular. And without diminishing the role of Yevhen Yevtushenko in actually trying to preserve this memory of the Babyn Yar tragedy, we should understand that but for Yevhen Yevtushenko, this very tragedy would have never been known to the Soviet people after World War II. And even though I've never read about it and I haven't got any documentary confirmation of the idea that I would like to share with you now, I will still do it. Some time ago, I bought a book of Khrersonsky, Vanguard Yiddish poetry in Poland, and the authors write in the preface that Jewish poetry in Yiddish is not known to the Polish population altogether. And they've got a huge library of Jewish poetry, but those who wrote in Yiddish are very little known in that country, and they are not also considered part of the Polish Jewish literature. So I guess, even though I didn't read anything about it, that the matter is the language in which poetry was written. Yes, we are now speaking about representations of the memory of Babyn Yar in literature, and I would like to invite everyone who's interested in this topic to read Irina Zakharchuk's article, Babyn Yar in in contemporary literature, and it's a wonderful overview of what has been written, and you will be amazed to learn how much has been written in Russian, in Ukrainian, in Yiddish. And I've got another question to ask of you, which is kind of a provocative question. And I will be quoting from very well reputed experts in this area, or relying on their ideas. Vasil Grossman, in his well-known essay, Ukraine without Jews, and it was actually about the Babyn Yar tragedy. So at the very end of this essay, he says, people are very strange creatures because they can teach themselves not to feel anything. You can lose your sleep if you see a child being ridden over by a car, but you will forget everything about mass killings. And again, I refer to Ilya Ehrenburg, and Boris referred to him as well earlier. And in 1944, he wrote about Babyn Yar. What's words? What's the pen if your heart is heavy with the memory? So here, hence my question: is there any sense to speak about such tragedies in literature, in poetry, if we doubt that people can feel the grandeur of this tragedy? And can we treat it as somebody else's memory, not ours? I would answer in the following way. In the times of the Civil War, people said that you can imagine dozens of shootings, but if you read the list of shot people containing dozens and hundreds of those, you lose this perception of the tragedy. So, and here we are speaking about 52,000 of people killed over the period of 2 days. It is beyond imagination. You can only measure and feel the tragedy through your compassion with the tragedy of one single person rather than 52,000 people. And Marianna actually learned about this tragedy through interviewing very specific people. I can't remember who said that, but somebody said that when one person is killed, it's a tragedy, but when 100,000 people are killed, it's just statistics. So we should, again, uplift these statistics to an individual tragedy. Marianna, what do you think? Say that I haven't got any Jewish roots. And my personal story and my relation to this understanding of what Holocaust is about and what the memory of the Jewish people is about stems from very special metaphysical nature of my acquaintance with those specific people. And it took me a long time to cover this road to learn about those people, including Boris Khrersonsky. I translated some documents from the Ruthenia archive that was Boris Khrersonsky's book, and that expanded my understanding, my grasp, and deepened my grasp of the idea that Holocaust is not about statistics, but rather about specific people, specific households, specific histories and stories of people who perished. Since 2014, I've been traveling to the east of Ukraine a lot. And when my book, Babyn Yar in Voices, was published, I had an opportunity to meet with people in Stanitsa Luhanska, very close to the contact line. And I saw it with my own eyes that the tragedy of death, the tragedy of people who are killed during armed conflicts, just is exacerbated by the fact that they remain nameless. In my own city or town of Zhovkva in Lviv region, we also have a smaller Babyn Yar of Zhovkva. About 16,000 people were killed there, but we only know the names of a couple of families who were exterminated there. And when I was writing those poems, I was focused on these names that I knew at that time. It's hard to explain, but at that time I had a kind of a mystical experience of relating to one name, Rahila, Rachel. And I learned her story and I lived her story. In this context, I have got a question to ask of you about this block of your book about somebody else's memory. Quite recently, I publicly discussed this topic with Serhiy Loznitsa, a Ukrainian film director, and I remember him saying that the memory of Babyn Yar isn't the memory of Ukrainian people, but rather of the Jewish people. Do you agree with that? Because Zuba said some time ago that it is a tragedy of both Ukrainian and Jewish people. Is there any link here? Would you agree with Loznitsa? You're asking me, who is the translator, and I've been translating poems for 30 years, and I'm the medium, the tie, the linking chain between two languages and two nations. And I get warmer with both nations and I get colder with both nations. To me, it's about coexistence of nations, of people, of ethnic groups that do not assimilate, but coexist and share space and time and existence. It's very close to the laws of thermodynamics, actually. If we start thinking about Babyn Yar as a tragedy of Jewish people alone, then we would be no different from fascists. because it's only through this division into us and them, ours and aliens. So those dividing lines mark the first step towards hate speech. And I think that the world is much more complex than that, much more diverse and interlinked. And when there are wildfires somewhere in the jungle in Brazil, we suffer as well. To us, that wildfire means climate change and it will affect us. When people die by bullets, when people who used to be your neighbors are killed, then you suffer as well. We are speaking about the number of victims of Babyn Yar, but according to the theory of 3 handshakes, there would be no single citizen of Kiev or Kievite who wouldn't have lost a relative or a neighbor. I would say all of them were affected because they lost a neighbor or a loved one or a classmate or a colleague, etc. Yes, exactly. So this experienced tragedy was absolutely global to Ukrainians. Almost every city or town had a Babyn Yar of its own. Because Jewish communities lived everywhere and they were affected everywhere by that tragedy. I would not actually dispute here with Loznitsa because I respect him as a film director and I think that he's a true artist. I've seen 6 of his movies. But I would disagree on that because Ukraine for a long time had no narrative of Babyn Yar. We didn't know how to speak about it, how to articulate this tragedy. We still don't know how to discuss the Volyn tragedy, which Poles would tag as Volyn massacre again. We still are not prepared to discuss Chernobyl openly and sincerely. So we haven't got this mechanism or mechanics of grief or culture of grief. And nobody has ever thought of why, when Ukrainian Cossacks died, Ukrainian nation had folk songs about their great deeds and their subsequent deaths. But when we lived through the Euromaidan, the only song that we sang at that time when the Heavenly 100 were killed was Slivikacha. And now we are living through this war, through this armed conflict, but we still don't have the toolkit of grief so that we can relieve and express our grief. So any artist, be it composer, poet, say writer, the one who works for the mass media. We should all contribute to this culture of grief. Thank you. Boris, will you respond to what Marianna has said? And after that, I would ask you to read your poems, if you don't mind. Yes, thank you. I would like to say that Ukraine lived through a lot of tragedies. They started back in the ancient times with Batey, who captured Kiev. And unlike in Russia, in Ukraine, we have the tools to discuss and express our grief. It's not only Plinekacha Potisini, but also Пішов козак за Дунай, там загинув в чужому краї. And a lot of other Ukrainian folk songs that actually are about grief and death. Whereas Russians in their victory narrative, they would be saying we need one victory no matter what the price might be. So we've got this ethnic model of the nation that we are still discussing. And sometimes we forget that we've got a very diverse nation. We have got ethnic Ukrainians, and we have got the Ukrainian people with lots of ethnic groups. So we cannot say that the tragedy of Babyn Yar affected Jews alone. We all know that it was a huge loss to the entire Ukrainian nation. But we cannot also turn a blind eye to the conflict between Ukrainians and Jews that has or had been in place for a long time. In Kiev, in the very center of the city, there's this monument to Bogdan Khmelnytsky between two cathedrals, Saint Sophia Cathedral and Saint Michael Cathedral, that was just destroyed and then restored. And he said that we are here in Kiev, which is a dawn of Eastern Orthodoxy. So, I know the model of this monument and the horse on which Bogdan Khmelnytsky is mounting. Actually was supposed to have also several emblems and insignia, but money was short and they did not complete the monument. Yes, we do remember Shevchenko's lines against Jews and Poles, and it is all related. And we say that Babyn Yar is our universal, shared, common tragedy. And I agree with Marianna in that today we see certain consequences of events taking place somewhere far away, thousands of kilometers away from us, thanks to the media, thanks to the social media in particular. It's not about printed media, about newspapers, but every day on television, on social media, we can see lots of various tragedies. For example, when the ISIS terrorists decapitated their victims, we saw it in front of our eyes. And I have to say that when you can find documentaries on YouTube, how public executions were carried out in 1946 in Kiev, we have to accept that as a tragedy as well. So our understanding of the Babyn Yar tragedy will come to us and will be shared when we believe that we are all part of the Ukrainian people. And as John Donne said, don't ask for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. Thank you, Boris. That's a wonderful concept of political nation that's part of the Ukrainian constitution of today. And I hope that we will live up to this notion and we will be skilled enough and experienced enough to analyze it thoroughly. So now to poems. Who will start? As you know, I write poetry in Russian and in Ukrainian, sometimes in both languages, sometimes in 3 languages. My first poem is in Russian.
Почти что четвероногая, раньше были такие. Раньше были писцы, считавшие буквы в слове, и комментаторы толковали не смысл, а числа, потому что смысл похоронен в земле в основе, а бессмыслица радугой над головой повисла. Каждый охотник желает знать, где сидят фазаны. Каждый охотник идет напролом с ружьем, с заряженным дробью. Каждый каратель желает знать, где сидят партизаны. Каждый глупец считает, что создан по образу и подобию. Каждый считает, что его из праха земного лепил предвечный мастер своими руками. И рыба мудрости в море печали, помедлив немного, уплывает от нас, шевеля 4 плавниками.
Дуже дякуємо вам, пане Борисе. Я тепер запрошую свою колегу Марію Монтегю прочитати.
Now I will invite Maria Montague to read the translation of this poem in English.
Where are you, Jews of the Levant, the wise men of Maghreb? Where are you, theologians of incomparable Cappadocia? Wisdom floats in a sea of sorrow like an ancient fish. 4-legged fish of the past must have looked like this. There used to be scribes who counted letters in words and commentators who interpreted numbers instead of meaning, because the meaning is buried in the ground, and nonsense hangs like a rainbow overhead. Every hunter wants to know where the pheasants sit. Every hunter goes ahead with a loaded shotgun. Every punisher wants to know where the partisans hide. Every fool thinks he was created in the image and the likeness. Everyone believes the eternal master sculpted him from the dust of the earth with his own hands. And the fish of wisdom in a sea of sorrow hesitates, floating away from us, moving its 4 fins. Translated from Russian by Nina Kosman.
Thank you, Maria.
Ну, а зараз вірш.
Now I will read a poem that was written in 2 languages at a time. So it has got the versions in both English and Ukrainian.
На лівому плечі сидить Мойсей, на правому плечі Аарон. Шепочуть вухи йому премудрість з обох боків. Це усна Тора, непорушний закон. Хто його не вчить, той зовсім здурів. Кошерна риба пливе в медовій річці. На дасі сидить лелека. Пасеться молочна хмара від хмари м'ясної далека. Ніхто не наважиться зварити казеня, знов-таки в молоці. Кази дерези, що куплена на ярмарку за 3 гроші, що мав у руці. А був хороший ярмарок, і непоганий сиру шматок. І коза хороша, дійна, слабка напередок. І синагога простора, кожний знайде свій куток. І поліцейський вусатий, пострубатий в зубах свисток. Але все це тут, на небі, де хала лежить на столі. І все ж таки нам цікаво, що залишилося там, на землі. Як там сусідські діти в достатку, мабуть, в теплі, знаходять досі золоті коробки в залі. Напевно, якщо знаходять, думаю, пощастило. Замість кладовища парк, там дівчина спирається на весло. У синагозі клуб, там танці, або церква. Христос воскрес. Шкода, такі подробиці не розглядиш з небес.
A rabbi in heaven sits on a golden throne. On his left shoulder sits Moses, on his right shoulder Aaron. They whisper wisdom in the ears from both sides. This is the oral Torah, the unbreakable law. A kosher fish swims in the river of honey. A cloud of milk grazes in a cloud of meat in the distance. No one dares to boil a baby goat again in the milk of a she-goat bought for 3 pennies at a town fair. It was a good fair, and the town was not bad at all. And its goat was a good milking goat, and its synagogue was wide and east-facing, and its mustachioed policeman sported a whistle in his crooked teeth. And now they are all here in the sky, where the challah is laid out on the table. And yet I wonder about what's left down there on earth, how the neighbors' children are they well off and warm? Do they still find crowns in the ashes? If they do, they probably believe they are lucky. Where the cemetery was before, a girl leans on her paddle in a park. In a synagogue, there's a dance club or maybe a church. Christ has risen. Pity that from your heaven you cannot see the details. Translated from Ukrainian by Nina Kosman. Apologies, I mispronounced Hala and then was distracted. I didn't do such a good job with the second half of the poem. Вибачте, Борисе.
Thank you, Boris, particularly for your second poem dedicated to Alexander Roitbrud, a wonderful Ukrainian-Jewish painter, artist, representative of that political nation that you've discussed. He died quite recently, and when you were reading that poem, I heard him speak, actually. Thank you very much. Yes, I dedicated this poem to Alexander Roitbrud, who I knew for 35 years, almost all my life. And I think that his last years were the years of fighting for the art gallery in Odessa and for the Ukrainian idea of a unified political nation. And that took a lot of his effort, of his strength, of his health. And during the commemoration ceremony, we noted that he will be well remembered, and we will publish his poems that will be illustrated by a Ukrainian poet and writer Serhiy Zhadan. And before, it was Alexander Royburt who would illustrate Zhadan's poems, a collection of poems. So you see this universal connection, these links, and this memory. Thank you very much. Thank you, Boris. Marianna, will you read a couple of your poems, please? While I'm sharing my screen, I would encourage the participants to start sending your questions.
Q&A function or chat, so we can start collecting them for a wider Q&A discussion.
У кімнаті була весіла. У кімнаті була весіла. У кімнаті була весіла біла сукня весільна. Я у шафу її сховала. Я у шафу її сховала. Я у шафу її сховала, бо Давида вбив. Айзенсгрупа Зондеркоманда. Айзенсгрупа Зондеркоманда. Айзенсгрупа Зондеркоманда. Поліцаї, СС, розстрільна. Ми з Давидом були щасливі. Ми з Давидом були щасливі. Ми з Давидом були щасливі. Ми з Давидом любили. Мама вранці його прибігла. Мама вранці його прибігла. Мама вранці його прибігла. Запитала, чи знаю. Я не знала. Всю ніч не спала. Я не знала, всю ніч не спала. Я не знала, всю ніч не спала. Чула постріли з яру. Я не маю вже, каже, сина. Я не маю вже, каже, сина. Я не маю вже, каже, сина, а тебе проклинаю. Ти живеш, а його не стало. Ти живеш, а його не стало. Ти живеш, а його не стало. Мається Вірко за кару. Я за кару це, мамо, маю. От стою і співаю, щоб не чути пострілів з яру. І потрошки вмираю.
In the room there hung, in the room there hung, in the room there hung, wedding dress white and long. Now I put it away, now I put it away, now I put it away, for my David got killed. Einsatzgruppe Sonderkommando. Einsatzgruppe Sonderkommando, Einsatzgruppe Sonderkommando, an SS execution squad. We were happy, David and I. We were happy, David and I. We were happy, David and I. David and I were in love. In the morning his mother came. In the morning his mother came. In the morning his mother came, asked me if I already knew. Didn't know, didn't sleep all night, didn't know, didn't sleep all night, didn't know, didn't sleep all night, heard some shots from the Yar. I'm a mother no more, she said. I'm a mother no more, she said. I'm a mother no more, she said. May you, woman, be cursed. He's gone and you're still alive. He's gone and you're still alive. He's gone and you're still alive. That's your punishment, Vika. That's my punishment, Mama dear. So I sway and I sing a ditty, drowning out the shots from the Yar, dying little by little.
Вірш, яким кричу, тому що можу тільки це робити, тільки це. Вірш, який роботу робить Божу, а тоді роздряпує лице, зведене судомою до кості, і горить Антоновим вогнем. Вірш ненадлий, вірш у високості, йду з ним, як Рахиль у Вифлеєм. Сине туги, вірше, Бен'яміне, сам у полі воїн, сам же й радь, в кублах зір, отруйне, кровоспинне. Сигми, літер, стигмами горять, стигмами горять.
The poem with which I scream because I can only do this, nothing else. The poem that works as a God-given cause tearing into your face, cramped in a scowl to the very bone, scorching like Antony's fire. This insatiable poem conceived above, I carry it like Rachel to Ephrath, son of morning, poem Benjamin all at once, and the legions in the nests of tears. A healing venom, sigmas of letters, smoldering like stigmas.
Тут я мусила би сказати кілька слів.
Here I should make a very brief introduction before I start reading. This book, Babyn Yar Voices, gives voice to many children. Even more voices of children can be found in poems that have not become part of this book. I know how it came around, but I think that every other poem was written to give a voice to a child. I never thought how many children were killed in Babyn Yar, together with their mothers and fathers.
Я виживу, стану просто тато, таким, як мій. Або як тато Раї. У мене буде пряників багато. Я буду тато. Тато не вмирає. У мене будуть діти, я і Йоня. І буде 2 чи 3 автомобілі. І буде шрам великий на долоні. І голубник, і навіть миші білі. І буде мама ніжна і ласкава, і з ніжними і теплими руками. Я виживу, бо я не маю права померти тут, в цій ямі, сам, без мами.
If I survive, I'll simply be a dad. Like any dad, like mine or Raya's. I'll carry gingerbreads to give away. I'll simply be a dad. Dads do not die. I'll have some kids myself and Yona and 3 or 4 automobiles. I'll sport a scar on my right palm and keep a dovecoat and albino mice. I'll have a mother, gentle, kind. Her hands will feel so soft, so warm. I will survive. I have no right to die here in this ditch, alone, without my mum.
Я дуже дякую, пане Борисі, пані Мар'яно, за...
Thank you, Boris, Marianna, for these poems, for these feelings. And I'm sure that many people on both sides of the ocean can feel this compassion and can feel what this tragedy is about. Thank you very much. Olesa, have we got any questions to our wonderful speakers? Yes, we are collecting questions. We haven't yet grouped them. Arisa, could you ask your question in person? Yeah, you are here with us, aren't you? Will you please switch on your camera and your mic?
Добрий вечір. Надзвичайно
Good afternoon. I'm extremely moved and I'm grateful to both of you for your generous sharing of your feelings through poems, through literature. I've grown up in Germany on Sellen's Todesfuge, and every time I am actually at a loss when I hear about this difference that is seen between different ethnic groups within one nation. I live in the UK now, and I don't have direct access to the Ukrainian society, but I feel it like Ukrainian people are still divided. Why is it so? You will know that the president of Ukraine is a Jew, and he was elected by 73% of Ukrainian voters. So I wouldn't say that there is this artificial division into ethnic groups. So ethnic thinking or ethnic mindset is still there. It is related to ethnic cultures and to traditions, religion, customs. Ukrainian ethnic group and a Jewish ethnic group have historically different traditions, customs, cultures, and religion. But most of those killed in Babyn Yar were not ethnically Jews. And even those who were ethnic Jews, they were not culturally Jewish. They did not belong to Judaism, because at that time they were all part of the large Soviet people. And under Stalin, it was prohibited to teach in Yiddish, and there were and the prohibition to teach in Hebrew was introduced back in 1918, even before Stalin, at the very dawn of the Soviet Union. So the latest case that was adjudicated in the Soviet Union, and it was investigated by KGB, was against a teacher who taught in Hebrew. And I think that today we are not that divided as we used to be before. And I will give you my own example. I entered medical school in Ivano-Frankivsk, and I completed my first year of studies there. And we were walking along the street with two girls, Marika and Hanka, and Marika was walking by my side, actually criticizing the Soviet power. And the other one, Hanka, said, I'm here and listening in. I hear what you say. But they say, just it doesn't matter because we all, be it of Ukrainian origin or of Jewish origin, are most critical of the Soviet government. And I was listening to them, and when I was interviewed by a KGB agent, was asked if I knew that the family of Mariko were Ukrainian bourgeois nationalists, and that. So I said no. I had no idea about it. If I may contribute. Last year, it was September, as far as I can remember, one platform called Ukraina-Moderna, Modern Ukraine. There was an article by Sergei Kerchik. It was called Stalin's Ethnic Policy, Communities of Survival. And the philosophers of culture will know that this idea of otherness becomes important and significant when people face certain threats, and when this image of common enemy is being construed in order to bring people together. So this idea of otherness has always been there, and we are speaking about Jews in Ukraine. The same pertains to this dichotomy of Lviv residents versus Kievans, or Lviv residents living in Kiev. So this otherness has always been present in any community, in any society. But today in Ukraine, thanks God, this idea is not that strong, even despite the armed conflict, despite the war, and even though we are at the very beginning of the formation of certain genre of literature, of essays and journalism, but we don't have this widespread of hate speech. And again, I say, thank God. Say 10 years ago, when we marked 70th anniversary of this tragedy, it was kept very low profile. It was very subdued, I would say. Few people would be discussing that publicly, and the story of Jews as the others actually dates back or roots in Stalin's policy, and even farther away in time, in the 14th, 15th, and 16th centuries. And Yaroslav Gritsak, Ukrainian historian, wrote about it. We do not juxtapose ourselves to the Jews. We do not see us as alien to Jews. We see ourselves as alien to totalitarian regimes. Yesterday, on the 29th of September, in Kiev, in Babyn Yar, two rabbis met with three priests, Christian priests. So a Greek Catholic Church, Orthodox Church of Ukraine, and there was a priest who spoke on behalf of Onufry, Metropolitan of the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine. So you will remember that 29,000 Jews were killed on that very day, on the 29th of September, 80 years ago. And all of those rabbis and priests came together just to be together there in time and space that can help us better commemorate and make sure that we would not be alienated from one another. We would not be juxtaposing us against them. And I understand that there are forces that would like to get us divided. And that is exacerbated because of the current situation, because of this armed conflict. But we are there to keep people together. Thank you very much, Arisia, for your question. We are still asking for your questions.
You can write them in English, it's not a problem, or you can ask them in English and we'll translate. І тепер я просила би Марію Монтегю задати своє.
And I would ask Maria Montague to ask her question and to thank her for wonderful reading of the poems. Thank you, Alessa. I'll try to speak in Ukrainian. Perhaps I will ask Alessa to help me in that. Marianna, I would like to ask you about your literary process. How do you write poems? The characters, the protagonists of your poems are so real, so authentic. And when you were writing, how did you relate to those protagonists or characters? Can you tell us that?
Ну, я коли відповідаю на це питання, мене це часто питають.
I'm often asked that question, and there are several levels of sincerity that I would practice while answering. And today I will be extremely sincere. In 2013, I lost my father. He died of cancer very fast. And I didn't have the time to mourn his death because I had to travel to another country because I won a scholarship. When I came back home sometime later, I felt that grief which was not cried out, which I didn't have a chance and time to express, to vent. A bit later, I went to the contact line together with some volunteers from Kharkiv, and I heard a lot of stories of those volunteers' life. And I spoke to internally displaced persons in Lviv. I particularly met one young woman who was looking for a way to earn her livelihood in Lviv. And I heard so many stories of all those people that I started writing poems about events in Donbass, in eastern Ukraine, on the contact line. And while I was writing those poems, I was showing them to my friends, and they amazingly perceived them as poems about Babyn Yar. I was struck. I was at awe. At the same time, I was invited to read some poems in Babyn Yar, and it was when we read those poems together with Boris. So, I had several new poems that I wrote after being invited to that audition, and then I thought of writing poems about Babyn Yar after that recital. So there are several poems not actually written about Babyn Yar, but today they are read as if they were. And those voices were the voices that I heard inside my head. I was pregnant with those poems and I had to give birth to them. I wrote 302 poems within 3 months. The book only contains 1/3 of those. And I'm still very depressed and very moved when I start reading those or reciting those poems, reading them out aloud. They stuck in my throat as a lump because every time I experienced that tragedy, and over the last few weeks, I recollected this experience of writing those poems, and that was awful experience. I couldn't move. I was lying in my bed, and the very last 6 poems were written on the day of my father's death, or just the anniversary of my father's death. And then it took me 6 months to select poems that would be included into this collection, Babyn Yar in Voices. And again, I sought advice from my friends, which should be there and which shouldn't. Some said that I should include all of them, but I understood that it would be too much. And actually, the arrangement of all those poems in that collection was yet another challenging effort. And I will tell you that I don't remember any of those poems by heart. And I haven't changed a single word since I wrote those poems. It was just an impulse. It was a concept that was somewhere in my head, and I tried several times to stop writing those poems, but I couldn't. Thank you very much, Marianna, for a very sincere and open answer. We've got a question from Oksana Guseva for Boris. Can you tell us from what collection of poems are those poems that you read? Will you unmute yourself, please? Is it one and the same collection, or are these 2 different books? The Ukrainian version of the second poem is from the book which is called Print Out. And very soon, 2 volumes of my book will appear in print. One is called Распечатка, and the second one, Rozдрукivka. It's all print out, but in Russian, and the second is in Ukrainian, and it actually sends us back to the times of the so-called Sam Vedov, or Sam Izdat. And the first poem is from the Duch Litera book called with Fire and Scent, and Marianna Kiyanovska wrote a preface to that book, for which I'm extremely thankful. Thank you. I can't see any questions from our participants, and if I may, I will ask my own question of both of you. My first question is to Boris, and my second is to Anton. Boris, you are a very well-known poet, and you're also a psychologist and a psychiatrist. Could you comment on the relation between personal individual trauma and the trauma of the entire nation? And is this latter articulated enough? If not enough, what should be done in order to change the situation? My second question is to Anton and other panelists. Ukraine recently celebrated its 30th anniversary of independence, and I deal in the issues of memory, and it is very difficult to commemorate various events, various tragedies, particularly such tragedy as Babyn Yar. Without going into too much detail, I would like to ask all of you, in the ideal world, how should we commemorate Babyn Yar in Ukraine, or the entire tragedy of World War II in Ukraine's territory? I will be very brief. First of all, being psychologists and as individuals, as poets, we should be speaking about individual traumas, not about traumas of the entire people. These can be traumas or these cannot be traumas, but it's up to people. They select themselves what to treat as trauma. In Odessa, for example, in 1941, about 10,000 Jews were incinerated in an artillery depot in Odessa, as I said. And they are seldom mentioned, they are seldom spoken about. And on the 1st of May 2014, 40 plus people died in a fire in the trade union's palace. And we speak about it a lot. We still believe that it's a huge loss to the country, irrespective of political allegiances of those people. So, and we discuss it, and some people call it Odessa's Hatin. But the killing of 10,000 Jews in Odessa back in 1941 is never mentioned. So they are not treated as a tragedy. Quite recently, I visited the Jewish cemetery in Odessa, the only one that has been preserved, because two were destroyed. And I saw one grave, and the plaque said that it was a memorial to the Holocaust victims, and it was erected by American Jews. And there's one more monument in the artillery park. It used to be a park, actually. Today it isn't. And they've got a monument. So for a certain person, it will be a trauma, but for another, it won't. And your second question is fairly complex. And I think that the country, the state, should remember its citizens who perished again, regardless of the idea that they espoused. And in Odessa, in 2018, 1918, there was a battle between Ukrainians and the communists, Ukrainian Cossacks and communists, and monuments to both parties were erected to commemorate that battle. Later on, only the communist monument was preserved, and it is still there. And nobody has ever thought of actually mentioning that Січові стрільці also were killed in that battle. If I may add, political science, social sciences, psychology use this notion of projective behavioral change. When a certain model is established, which is shaped over an individual's life. And oftentimes, this shaping of the behavioral model is affected by the family, but not only the family, but also by school, by environment, by peers, and by the governmental or public policies. And this model, the shaping of this model should start in early childhood. And when a grown-up person chooses a way how to experience trauma, how to live through trauma, and how to overcome it, we should always remember this behavioral model, and we should take care of traumatized people and treat them with respect. We should always remember about respect. It seems obvious, but very people think about it, that back in the 19th century, respect of children, respect of women were not a universal category. So you will remember that Korchak wrote about a book, Child's Right to Respect. And he started writing that book during World War I in Kiev. And that book actually caused an entire shift of paradigm in pedagogical sciences. So we should start talking about respect and start forming this respect in a person as a model of behavior. Respect of your neighbors, respect of your family, respect of other people, and respect of other nations. So we understand that the world is a very diverse and complex entity, and what is good for one nation might not be quite acceptable in another nation. But respect should be the basis on which our mutual understanding and coexistence should lean. Anything to add? Yes, Alyssa. Relating the trauma for 30 years, for the entire period of Ukraine's independence. And we are just approaching those contact points, particularly in the context of the armed conflict of the war. It is extremely difficult. And the conflict changes optics, and it has always been so in various countries. So we are almost there, I would say. But can we say that we are close to the completion of this entire process? No. In 1990s, when university professors had to sell goods in the open air market, they didn't have the time to analyze history and to deeply think of what happened 80 years ago. But I think that time is the most limited resource in any country. Will we have enough time and enough wisdom to develop this narrative, to actually to voice our trauma? It's an open question, and we have to write this book of our life, of our identity, of our relations. And there's this abyss or the precipice that divides us from the Second World War. It's one thing that we are trying to get rid of our totalitarian past. And a person, Vasil Grossman, who was a World War II veteran and a poet, and he was well respected, and he could insist on certain attitudes. But imagine Vasil Shvets with his poem that I referred to at the very beginning of our conversation, and would say, why are you discussing it? Whether the tragedy is Ukrainian or Jewish. So just what are you talking about? People. So this authority of eyewitnesses, of those who bear witness to those events, would have speeded up, accelerated the entire process of articulating the trauma and preserving the memory. But we had this gap between 1945 and 1990s. So only after gaining independence did we have an opportunity to return to the memory and start forming it and discussing it and articulating this trauma. And we have to be changing this situation, to be overcoming this or bridging this gap. And if we fail to do so, then we might perish as a nation. Thank you very much for your answer. I would like to thank all participants of this discussion, which comes to its end. And I would like to thank all of you for your participation. And I would like to give the floor to Natalia Fedosyuk. First of all, Marianna, Boris, Anton, thank you very much for a very deep, revealing, and very sincere discussion that is available on our website in PDF format, and we support the publishing house Duchen publishes and offers to its readers, and you can even download Marianna's book today. Boris is going to be residence in the literary residency that we are supporting in Buchach in Ukraine, and his books will also be available on our website. So yeah, I encourage you to visit our site and to read those poems. Thank you very much, Natalia. I would like to thank Marianna Kiyanovska, Boris Khrersonsky, Anton Drobovych, and Natalia Fedosyuk from Ukrainian-Jewish Encounter for this discussion, as well as the interpreter. And I would like to thank all of the participants of this webinar dedicated to the 80th anniversary of the Babyn Yar tragedy. Thank you very much. Thank you. Goodbye. Goodbye.